Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back in time, way back, to the bustling, grimy, and utterly fascinating streets of medieval London. Imagine, if you will, the flickering torchlight casting long, dancing shadows on cobblestone streets, slick with, well, let's just say medieval refuse. The air, a fragrant blend of wood smoke, unwashed humanity, and something suspiciously like last week's fish. You pull your threadbare cloak tighter, your stomach rumbling, as the cacophony of 1,000 different cries and clatterings assaults your ears. Every step you take, you're dodging carts laden with goods, pigs rooting through the mud, and the occasional unfortunate individual emptying their chamber pot right from an upper window. Ah, the good old days, right? You probably wouldn't survive a week, let alone a year, without a serious tetanus shot and a strong stomach. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just arrived in London, perhaps from a small village, lured by whispers of opportunity, or maybe you were born here, with destiny seemingly etched into the city's very stones. But opportunity, you quickly discover, is a slippery eel in this place. The city itself, despite its imposing walls and grand structures like St. Paul's Cathedral, which, by the way, was a truly massive edifice even back then, dwarfing everything around Itis, a labyrinth of narrow, winding lanes. These aren't the broad avenues you might imagine. No, these are claustrophobic alleys where the buildings practically lean in to kiss each other overhead, blocking out most of the sun. The ground underfoot is a mix of packed earth, cobbles, and whatever else has been discarded, which is a lot. Your first impression is overwhelming. The sheer press of bodies is something you've never experienced. People are everywhere, merchants hawking their wares, apprentices scurrying on errands, beggars with outstretched hands, and well-dressed gentlemen on horseback, splashing mud as they pass. You quickly learn to keep your wits about you, because a moment of distraction can mean a shove into a stinking puddle, or worse, the loss of the few coins you possess. Historians still argue whether the sheer density of the population contributed more to disease or to the rapid exchange of ideas that characterized medieval urban centers. It's a chicken and egg situation, really, but either way, you're stuck in the middle of it. Life here, you realize, is a constant negotiation with dirt, disease, and desperation. The smells, oh the smells. Imagine a permanent aroma of stale beer, damp wool, human waste, and unidentifiable cooking odors, all mingling in a truly unforgettable bouquet. There's a curious tidbit, though. Despite the general lack of sanitation, some wealthier Londoners would occasionally use aromatic herbs like lavender and rosemary to try and mask the stench in their homes, a kind of medieval air freshener that probably didn't do much against the prevailing miasma. You, however, are not one of the wealthy ones. You're just trying to figure out where your next meal is coming from and how to avoid stepping in something truly repulsive. Every sound is amplified. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the distant bleating of sheep being driven to market, the raucous laughter from a tavern, and the constant hum of human chatter, all woven into a relentless soundtrack. This isn't a place for quiet contemplation. It's a place for survival. And you, my friend, are about to find out just how hard that really is. So you've survived your initial sensory overload in London. Good for you. Now let's talk about how you actually make a crust in this bustling, if somewhat malodorous metropolis. You see, making a living isn't just about finding a job. It's about navigating an intricate web of tradition, regulation, and unspoken rules. And the biggest spider in that web? The guilds. Imagine, if you will, that every single respectable profession, from baking bread to weaving cloth, is controlled by its own secret society. Not secret in the sense of cloaks and daggers, but secret in the sense that you absolutely cannot join unless you know someone, are related to someone, or have a truly exceptional stroke of luck. These are the guilds, and they are everything. If you wanted to be, say, a draper selling fabric, you didn't just hang out a sign. Oh no, You had to apprentice under a master draper, often for 7 long years, essentially working for room, board, and the vague promise of a future. This was less internship and more indentured servitude with slightly better prospects. The guilds were designed to protect their members, control quality, and, let's be honest, restrict competition. They set prices, decided who could practice a trade, and even dictated the specific methods you had to use. Think of it as a medieval union, a cartel, and a quality assurance board all rolled into one, with a sprinkle of medieval VIP club. If you weren't part of a guild, your options were severely limited. You were either doing menial, unskilled labor carrying water, hauling refuse, being a general gopher, or you were on the very fringes of society, perhaps a peddler with no fixed stall, constantly evading the guild masters and city officials. This brings up a mainstream historical fact. London's economy was heavily regulated by its powerful guilds, like the mercers, the grocers, or the goldsmiths. These aren't just quaint historical footnotes. They were the backbone of the urban economy and social structure. They provided welfare for their members, looked after widows and orphans of deceased guild members, and even participated in city governance. It wasn't all about keeping people out. It was also about creating a tightly knit community for those inside. But woe betide you if you try to undercut a guild member's prices or sell shoddy goods. Your reputation, and potentially your livelihood, would be toast. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some guilds had incredibly specific, almost bizarre rules. For instance, the Pouchmakers Guild in London, around your time, had regulations on the exact number of stitches required for certain types of pouches. If you deviated even slightly, your work could be confiscated. Imagine the meticulous inspection process. It's like they had medieval ISO standards, but enforced by guys with serious scowls and presumably really good eyesight for tiny stitches. It makes you wonder how anyone ever innovated, doesn't it? But Master, what if we used 3 stitches instead of 4? It holds just as well. Silence, Apprentice. The pouch gods demand 4. Historians still argue whether the rigid control of the guilds ultimately stifled economic growth or provided much-needed stability and quality control in a pre-industrial world. On one hand, it certainly made it hard for outsiders to break in. If you arrived in London with a brilliant new idea for, say, a faster loom, you'd probably find yourself blocked at every turn by the established Weavers Guild who preferred their traditional methods. On the other hand, when you bought a loaf of bread from a baker who was a member of the Bakers Guild, you could be reasonably sure it wasn't made with sawdust and ground-up rat bones because the guild would literally check. Well, mostly. Sometimes. Maybe. So, for you, fresh off the boat or merely contemplating your meager prospects, getting into a guild is the golden ticket. But it's not a simple case of filling out an application. It requires years of unpaid or barely paid labor, absolute obedience to your master, and the hope that you don't get sick or run into trouble before your apprenticeship is done. And if you're female, well, your path is even more restricted, but we'll get to that later. For now, just know that without that guild affiliation, you're looking at the kind of work that truly earns its name: grinding. Alright, you've grasped the guild system, a bit of a gatekeeper, a bit of a safety net, but mostly a whole lot of hoops to jump through. Let's assume, for a moment, you've managed to secure some form of work, whether it's as an apprentice, a journeyman, a qualified craftsman who still works for a master, or just a casual laborer. What does your day actually look like? Because, my friend, it's not a 9 to 5 with a lunch break and a mandatory yoga class. Your alarm clock isn't a chirping bird or a smart device. It's the first faint light of dawn, or perhaps the clang of a church bell marking prime, the first canonical hour. You're up, usually before the sun, as work begins with the light available. If you're an apprentice, you're likely sleeping on a straw mattress, possibly in the workshop itself or a cramped attic room. No personal space here, definitely no me time. Your first task might be to fetch water from the communal well or conduit, a heavy, cold chore that sets the tone for the day. Imagine hauling buckets from a public fountain, jostling with countless others, the air still damp and chilly. Forget your morning coffee ritual. You're more likely to get a stale piece of bread and some weak ale for breakfast. Yes, ale even for breakfast. Water quality wasn't exactly top-notch, so fermented drinks were often safer. Bottoms up, literally. Your workday is long, relentlessly so. There's no strict 8-hour day. You work from dawn until dusk, with only short breaks for food. If you're a craftsman, you're hunched over your bench, meticulously shaping wood, hammering metal, or weaving fabric. The work is physically demanding and repetitive. Your hands ache, your back protests, and your eyes strain in the dim light, even with the occasional tallow candle if you're lucky enough to afford one. Think about the cumulative strain. Repetitive stress injuries were just a fact of life. There was no workers' compensation, no ergonomic assessments, just suck it up and keep hammering. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. The medieval workday was largely dictated by natural light, meaning longer hours in summer and shorter, but still intensive, hours in winter. There was no electric light to extend the day artificially, so productivity was inherently tied to the sun's cycle. Imagine trying to finish a finely detailed piece of embroidery as the light fades, your fingers numb with cold. It's a race against the setting sun. Now for a quirky tidbit. To manage these long hours and often poor conditions, some medieval workplaces, particularly larger workshops or monasteries, would sometimes employ a reader to entertain or educate the workers during their tasks. Imagine someone reading aloud from a religious text or an exciting romance novel while you're grinding grain or polishing armor. It's a surprisingly modern concept, a kind of medieval podcast, though probably with less true crime and more tales of chivalry. And so, Sir Lancelot did valiantly smite the dragon. Now, back to your leather-curing Geoffrey. Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of leisure time for the working classes genuinely reflected a constant state of toil, or if there were more informal breaks and community events that aren't well documented. Were those long hours continuous, unblinking labor, or did they include moments of storytelling, shared food, or quick naps? You certainly hope so, because the alternative sounds like a fast track to burnout, if such a concept even existed beyond simply collapsing from exhaustion. For you, there's little escape from the grind. Your world is your workshop, your street, and the persistent rhythm of your labor. The city outside, with its endless opportunities and dangers, often feels a million miles away, even as you can hear its constant rumble. You've clocked in your endless hours. The sun has finally dipped below the rooftops, and your stomach is now staging a full-scale rebellion. So what's for dinner in medieval London? Brace yourself, because fine dining is definitely not a phrase you'll be using. This isn't the era of artisanal sourdough and avocado toast. This is the era of whatever you can get your hands on, and often, not enough of it. Your diet, if you're a common laborer or a struggling apprentice, is largely dictated by necessity and what's cheap and available. Grains are your absolute staple. Think pottage, a thick, gruel-like soup made from oats, barley, or wheat, boiled with whatever vegetables might be on hand, maybe some cabbage, onions, or peas if you're lucky. It's nourishing in a bland, stick-to-your-ribs kind of way, and it's served for pretty much every meal. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Variety is a luxury few can afford. You might get a chunk of coarse, dark bread to go with it, baked from rye or barley, often dense and heavy. It's not the fluffy white stuff you might pick up at the supermarket. This bread is built to last, and probably to break a tooth or two. Meat is a rare treat for most. You're not feasting on prime cuts of beef. If you get meat at all, it's likely salt pork, smoked herring, or perhaps some less desirable offal. Chickens and eggs are sometimes available, but often too expensive for daily consumption. Fish, especially on fast days mandated by the church, and there were many of those nearly half the year, could be fast days, becomes a crucial protein source, particularly for a city like London situated on the River Thames. However, fresh fish spoils quickly, so you're often looking at salted or dried varieties. Imagine the sheer effort of chewing through that, day after day. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Famine was a recurring and terrifying reality in medieval England. Crop failures due to bad weather or disease meant soaring food prices, and for many, outright starvation. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, for example, decimated populations across Europe, highlighting just how precarious food security was. You might survive the day's work, but a poor harvest could wipe out your entire family. The phrase living hand to mouth wasn't just an idiom, it was a literal description of existence. Now for a quirky tidbit. To supplement their diets, urban poor would sometimes resort to foraging in whatever scraps of green space they could find, or even collecting discarded food from wealthier households or market stalls. There's even evidence of people eating various forms of wild greens, roots, and berries, though this was often out of desperation rather than a culinary choice. One particular delight you might encounter is lamprey, a parasitic jawless fish that looks like an eel with a suction cup mouth full of teeth. It was considered a delicacy by the rich, but the less desirable parts, or smaller ones, might find their way into a commoner's pottage. Bon appétit. Or perhaps don't. Historians still argue whether the common medieval diet, despite its monotony and occasional scarcity, was actually nutritionally adequate for the demanding physical labor. While lacking in variety and often fresh produce, the sheer volume of grains consumed, combined with occasional protein, might have provided enough calories and basic nutrients for survival, albeit without much enjoyment. You, however, aren't thinking about caloric intake or macronutrients. You're just wondering if there's enough pottage left in the pot to fill your rumbling belly one more time before you try to sleep, the gnawing anxiety of tomorrow's hunger already creeping in. So, you've eaten your fill of pottage and coarse bread, and now, the exhaustion from full day of toil is truly setting in. Where do you lay your weary head in medieval London? Forget spacious lofts or even your own cozy studio apartment. Your living situation is, to put it mildly, intimate. For most common folk, especially laborers and apprentices, privacy is a luxury that simply doesn't exist. You're likely sharing a small room, or even just a bed, with several other people. Imagine a single, cramped chamber, perhaps in a multi-story timber-framed house. The house itself might belong to a master craftsman, and you, as his apprentice, are relegated to an upstairs room or even a corner of the workshop. Beds are often straw mattresses, sometimes on a raised platform to keep you off the cold, damp floor, but just as often directly on the dirt or rushes. And those rushes? They're great for absorbing spills and keeping the floor somewhat clean, but they also collect pretty much everything else, including fleas, lice, and whatever crumbs fall from your meager meal. It's not exactly hypoallergenic. The concept of a separate bedroom for each family member, let alone each individual, is unheard of. Families, if they can afford their own dwelling, live in one or two rooms where all daily activities, cooking, eating, socializing, and sleeping occur. Children often sleep with their parents, and apprentices might sleep alongside the family or with other apprentices. It's a very communal existence, which can be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, there's always someone around. On the other, personal space is a foreign concept. If you wanted 5 minutes to yourself, you'd probably have to go stand in the middle of a very busy street, which has its own drawbacks. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval London homes, particularly for the working class, were typically small, multi-purpose dwellings, often lacking dedicated rooms for specific functions. This efficiency was born out of necessity. Land within the city walls was incredibly valuable and space was at a premium. Houses were built tall and narrow, maximizing vertical space rather than sprawling outwards, contributing to that sense of being constantly overlooked by leaning buildings. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some wealthier Londoners, attempting to escape the ground-level stench, would often build their latrines or privies directly over the Thames or other waterways, so the waste would simply be carried away. For the less fortunate, it was communal cesspits or chamber pots emptied into the street, which, as you've probably noticed by now, didn't exactly help with the city's general aroma. So, while you try and drift off, you might hear the splash of someone's nocturnal discharge, followed by the scurry of rats. A true lullaby. Historians still argue whether the lack of distinct personal space in medieval homes contributed to stronger community bonds or exacerbated tensions and spread disease more rapidly. Was this forced proximity a source of comfort and shared experience, or simply a breeding ground for conflict and contagion? You certainly feel the constant presence of others, their breathing, their shifting, and their occasional snores. As you finally close your eyes, you're acutely aware of the thin walls, the sounds of the street just outside, and the perpetual hum of the city, which never truly sleeps, even when you desperately try to. Your bedroom is less a sanctuary and more a transient holding cell until the next dawn demands your labor. You've made it through another day and another night crammed into your shared, probably flea-infested, sleeping quarters. But waking up in medieval London comes with its own pervasive dread, the ever-present threat of disease. Forget your modern medical advancements, your vaccines, your antibiotics. Here, every sniffle could escalate, every scratch could fester, and the biggest killer isn't the tax collector, it's the invisible army of microbes. London, for all its bustling energy, was a veritable petri dish. The close proximity of people, the lack of proper sanitation, the contaminated water sources. Remember that communal well and those charming privies over the Thames? And the omnipresent filth created a perfect breeding ground for epidemics. You'd witness illness constantly. Coughing, shivering, the telltale blotches of smallpox, or the agonizing grip of dysentery. It wasn't a matter of if you get sick, but when and how severe it would be. A simple cut could lead to a fatal infection. A common cold could turn into pneumonia. And the dreaded plague, well, we'll get to that. Here's a mainstream historical fact. London suffered numerous outbreaks of plague, smallpox, dysentery, and other infectious diseases throughout the medieval period. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a regular, cyclical part of life, dramatically impacting population numbers and daily existence. The Black Death in the mid-14th century famously wiped out an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of Europe's population, and London was certainly not spared. Imagine living with that constant, low-level hum of existential dread. It's like a permanent, very unpleasant game of Russian roulette, but with more rats. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Medieval medical practitioners, often called barber surgeons, were a curious blend of hairdresser and doctor. They would cut your hair, shave your beard, and then perhaps pull your teeth, set a broken bone, or even perform a rudimentary amputation. Their understanding of anatomy and disease was, let's just say, developing. They often relied on practices like bloodletting, draining bad blood from the body, which, spoiler alert, usually made things worse, or the application of bizarre poultices. You might encounter a doctor prescribing a concoction of ground-up earthworms and dried toad, or perhaps suggesting you rub a live chicken on your buboes. Honestly, you'd probably rather just take your chances with the disease. Yes, Master Barber Surgeon, I just need to trim no leeches today, thanks. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly understood the concept of contagion, or if their efforts at quarantine and sanitation were purely based on observation rather than a scientific understanding of germs. Did they grasp that being near a sick person spread illness, or did they simply notice that people got sick when others around them were sick? Either way, their preventative measures, while often rudimentary, sometimes included isolating the infected or attempting to clean up particularly foul areas, which, by sheer luck, might have offered some minor protection. For you, seeking medical help is a desperate gamble, often as dangerous as the illness itself. Your best bet is usually a strong constitution, a bit of luck, and perhaps a prayer to your patron saint. Otherwise, you're just hoping you don't wake up with the telltale fever and chills that signal something far worse than just another day of hard labor. Having successfully dodged the Grim Reaper in the form of medieval maladies for now, at least your thoughts, predictably, turn to acquiring supplies. You need food beyond the daily pottage, perhaps some new thread for your worn tunic, or even a tool to make your work a fraction easier. This means a trip to the markets, the throbbing heart of medieval London. Stepping into the marketplace is like plunging into another dimension of noise, smells, and sheer human chaos. Forget the orderly aisles of a modern supermarket. This is a sensory assault. The main market areas, like Cheapside, are a vast, sprawling collection of stalls, temporary shelters, and merchants shouting their wares. You're jostled from all sides by porters carrying heavy loads, women haggling over prices, and children darting through the crowd like mischievous sprites. The ground beneath your feet is probably a mucky mess, a blend of spilled goods, animal droppings, and general human detritus. And the smells? A dizzying blend of fresh bread, rotting vegetables, pungent cheeses, raw meat, and unwashed bodies. It's an olfactory experience you won't soon forget, whether you want to or not. Every type of good has its designated area. You'll find the fishmongers with their glistening, if often stinking, catches, the butchers with sides of meat hanging openly, attracting flies, the bakers displaying their loaves, and the textile merchants with bolts of wool and linen. Bargaining is not just accepted, it's expected. If you don't haggle, you're not just losing money, you're practically insulting the merchant. You have to be shrewd, quick-witted, and ready to walk away if the price isn't right. This isn't a quick transaction. It's a performance, a dance of persuasion and bluff. Imagine trying to get a decent price on some dried beans when you're utterly famished and the vendor knows it. Tough crowd. Here's a mainstream historical fact. London's markets were highly specialized, with specific areas or streets dedicated to certain goods, such as Bread Street for bakers, Milk Street for dairy products, and Poultry for fowl. This organization, though seemingly chaotic to modern eyes, provided a practical way for people to find what they needed amidst the sprawling urban landscape. It also speaks to the intense competition and regulation within these trades, even among sellers in the same market. Now for a quirky tidbit. To ensure fair weights and measures, market officials, known as alewrights for ale or clerk of the market, would regularly inspect stalls. If a baker's loaf was found to be underweight, or a measure of ale was short, the offending merchant could face fines, public humiliation, or even, in severe cases, the pillory, a rather public way to say, "Don't mess with our measurements." So, while you're trying to get a good deal, the vendor is probably also glancing nervously over their shoulder, hoping their scales are accurate. No. Good sir, this loaf is precisely a farthing's worth. I swear by my mother's third cousin twice removed. Historians still argue whether the apparent freedom of medieval markets, with their vibrant haggling, genuinely allowed for fair prices based on supply and demand, or if local monopolies and guild controls often kept prices artificially high for the common consumer. Were you truly getting a good deal if the only people selling a certain item were all part of the same price-fixing guild? For you, however, it's less about economic theory and more about stretching your few pence as far as they can possibly go, trying to buy enough to keep starvation at bay until the next meager wage comes your way. The market is a necessary evil, a constant reminder of your precarious existence, but also the only place where survival is truly possible. You've navigated the bustling markets, clutching your meager purchases, and now you're making your way back through the labyrinthine streets. But as you walk, you're keenly aware that medieval London isn't just a place of commerce and toil. It's also a place where the rule of law, such as it is, hangs precariously in the balance. Understanding how justice, or the lack thereof, operates is crucial to your survival, because getting on the wrong side of it could mean a very, very bad day. Forget grand courthouses and nuanced legal arguments. Medieval justice is often swift, public, and brutal. The concept of innocent until proven guilty is, let's say, more of a suggestion than a hard rule. If you're accused of something, especially by someone with more social standing, your word doesn't carry much weight. Crime is a constant fear, from petty theft like pickpocketing, a common hazard in crowded markets, to more serious offenses like assault or even murder. The narrow, dark alleys are perfect breeding grounds for illicit activity once the sun goes down, and honest folk tend to lock their doors and stay indoors after dark. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Justice in medieval London was largely administered by local courts, like the Husting Court or the Sheriff's Court, and was often focused on maintaining public order and exacting retribution. Punishments were frequently public spectacles, designed to deter others. You might witness a thief in the pillory, an unfortunate soul being carted through the streets with a sign detailing their offense, or even, for more serious crimes, a public hanging at Tyburn. These weren't just punishments. They were entertainment and grim warnings for the populace. Imagine trying to walk past that without a shiver down your spine. Now for a quirky tidbit. One fascinating aspect of medieval law was the concept of sanctuary. If you committed a crime, but not treason or arson, and managed to reach a designated church or cathedral, you could claim sanctuary. This protected you from immediate arrest for 40 days, giving you time to arrange your affairs and confess, after which you usually had to confess your crime and abjure the realm essentially. Swear to leave England forever by the quickest route, barefoot, and dressed in a penitential gown. It was a bizarre, almost theatrical way to avoid immediate justice, giving you a chance to literally run away from your problems, albeit across the sea. Right? Just need to make it to Westminster Abbey. Then it's off to France, I guess. Historians still argue whether the harsh and public nature of medieval punishments genuinely acted as an effective deterrent against crime, or if they simply created a more brutal society where desperation still drove many to offend. Did the sight of a severed hand nailed to a doorpost really make people think twice, or did it just desensitize them to violence? For you, the common Londoner, navigating this legal landscape means a constant vigilance. You try to avoid trouble, keep your nose clean, and certainly don't draw attention to yourself. Because in medieval London, a minor infraction could quickly escalate, and the scales of justice often seemed heavily weighted against those with little money or influence. Stay out of trouble, watch your back, and whatever you do, don't get caught with your hand in someone else's pouch. You've had a brush with the chaotic realities of medieval justice, and luckily, you're still in one piece. But as you continue your journey through the bustling streets, you can't help but notice the small figures darting amongst the adults, often engaged in tasks far beyond their years. These are the children of medieval London, and their lives are as harsh, if not harsher, than your own. Forget the concept of a protected, carefree childhood filled with toys and school. For the vast majority of children in medieval London, childhood was a brief prelude to the adult world of work and responsibility. As soon as they were physically able, often from the age of 5 or 6, children from poorer families would be expected to contribute to the household economy. This meant fetching water, collecting firewood, tending to younger siblings, or performing simple chores. There were no child labor laws, no minimum age for employment. Survival depended on every pair of hands. If you were a boy, your destiny was often set early. Many would enter apprenticeships around the age of 10 or 12, as we discussed with the guilds. Imagine a scrawny, perhaps underfed, child being put to work under a stern master, learning a trade that would define their entire life. They might be hauling heavy sacks, cleaning workshops, or performing repetitive, tedious tasks for 7 years or more, all while living under the master's roof with little autonomy. Girls, too, were expected to work, often within the home, learning skills like spinning, weaving, cooking, and brewing, or sometimes serving as domestic servants in wealthier households. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Child mortality rates in medieval London were extraordinarily high, with a significant number of children not surviving past their 5th birthday due to disease, malnutrition, and accidents. Life was truly precarious for the youngest members of society, making every surviving child a small miracle. This reality probably influenced how parents viewed and interacted with their children, a stark contrast to modern parenting. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Despite the harsh realities, children did find ways to play. Archaeological digs in London have unearthed evidence of simple toys, like small wooden animals, clay marbles, and even miniature spinning tops. And there's mention of games like Hoodman Blind, a medieval version of Blind Man's Bluff, and various ball games played in the streets or fields outside the city walls. So, Amidst the relentless toil and constant threat, you might glimpse a fleeting moment of joy, a small group of children momentarily forgetting their burdens to chase a rag ball. It's a poignant reminder that even in the toughest times, the spirit of childhood finds a way. Quick, Agnes, Master Bartholomew's not looking. To the mud puddle. Historians still argue whether medieval parents, despite the high mortality rates, formed emotional bonds with their children in the same way modern parents do, or if a more detached approach was common due to the constant threat of loss. Did they grieve as intensely, or was a certain emotional distance a necessary coping mechanism? For you, watching these young ones, it's a grim forecast of your own hardscrabble future, a continuation of the same struggle. You can see the weariness in their eyes, the smudges of dirt on their faces, and you know, with a heavy heart, that their path, just like yours, is paved with endless labor and little respite. You've seen the tireless efforts of children in medieval London, a stark reminder of the relentless demands of survival. Now, let's turn our gaze to another vital, yet often constrained, segment of the population: women. Their roles in this bustling, grimy city are diverse, indispensable, and often frustratingly restricted. Medieval London is very much a man's world, at least in terms of public power and official roles. Women cannot hold public office, serve as jurors, or participate in the formal political structures of the city. Their legal standing is often tied to their male relatives, their fathers, brothers, or husbands. If you are a woman, your ability to own property, conduct business, or even represent yourself in court can be severely limited, especially if you are married. A married woman is legally considered femme covert, meaning her legal identity is covered by her husband's. Sounds romantic, right? Not so much when it means you can't sign a contract without his permission. However, despite these legal and social limitations, women are far from invisible or idle. In fact, they are absolutely crucial to the functioning of the city's economy and households. Many women work alongside their husbands in various trades, running shops, assisting in workshops, or managing the household accounts. If you are a single woman or a widow, you might have considerably more freedom to conduct business, as you are then considered femme solo woman alone in the legal sense, with more rights to manage your own affairs. Many women run taverns, brew ale, bake bread, spin wool, or sell goods in the market. These are not mere side hustles. For many, they are the primary means of supporting themselves and their families. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Women in medieval London played significant economic roles, particularly in artisanal trades and retail, often working within or alongside their family units. While not formally recognized in the same way as men, their contributions were fundamental to the urban economy. Think of the bustling market stalls. Many of those vendors, haggling fiercely, would have been women. Now, for a quirky tidbit. There's evidence that women in medieval London had a surprising range of occupations beyond the stereotypical. While many were brewers or textile workers, records show women as diverse professions as fishmongers, shoemakers, glovers, bookbinders, and even physicians, though the latter was often an informal role, passing down herbal remedies and practical knowledge. You might even encounter a bone setter who, despite not being a formally trained physician, might just be able to pop your dislocated shoulder back in a place better than a barber surgeon with a thirst for bloodletting. Just a quick snap, love, and you'll be right as rain. Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of formal recognition for women's economic contributions meant they were truly marginalized, or if their informal but vital roles allowed them a different kind of power and influence within the community. Was it a disadvantage to be outside the male-dominated guild structure, or did it allow for more flexibility? For you, a woman in this era, life is a constant balancing act between societal expectations and the sheer necessity of making ends meet. You navigate a world designed by men, but you do so with resilience, resourcefulness, and a quiet strength that often goes unrecorded, but is absolutely essential for the very fabric of London life. You've witnessed the tireless efforts of women and children, contributing their part to the relentless churn of medieval London life. But even after all that labor, after haggling in the markets and scraping by with every penny, your meager earnings are never truly your own. Because as in any society, there are hands reaching into your pouch, taking their cut, the taxes and tithes. Forget complex tax codes and annual filings. Medieval taxation is more direct and often feels like a constant drain. The city government, the king, and the church all demand their share, and there's little you can do about it. When you earn money, whether it's from selling your wares or wages for your labor, a portion of it is simply not yours to keep. You might encounter market tolls, where a small fee is levied on goods brought into the city or sold at a stall. Every transaction, every piece of commerce, potentially has a hidden cost. It's like a medieval sales tax, but less transparent and more easily evaded if you're nimble enough and willing to risk getting caught. Then there are the royal taxes. The king needs money for wars, for maintaining his court, and for various whims. These taxes might be levied on property, on personal wealth, or even as a simple poll tax, a flat fee per person, regardless of income. The latter, as you can imagine, is particularly unpopular with the working poor. Imagine someone coming to your cramped dwelling, demanding a fixed sum that might represent a significant portion of your weekly earnings. It feels less like a civic duty and more like legalized robbery. Oh, you just earned a penny? Half of that is for the king's new falcon, sorry. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval Londoners were subject to various forms of taxation from both the crown and the city authorities, often levied irregularly to fund specific needs like wars or city defenses. This constant demand for funds, combined with a lack of consistent wages, meant that many lived on the brink of destitution, their financial stability always precarious. Now for a quirky tidbit. Beyond the official taxes, you also have the church's tithe. This is a religious obligation, traditionally a tenth of your produce or income, given to the local parish church. It's not a tax in a modern sense, but it functions much like one, a mandatory contribution that you're expected to hand over, often in kind, like a tenth of your harvest or a tenth of your cheese, if you're a cheesemonger. Imagine trying to scrimp and save, only for the local priest to come calling for his portion. It's a good thing you believe in salvation, because it's costing you. Yes, Father, this is indeed a tenth of my turnips. No, I didn't hold back any of the bigger ones. Why do you ask? Historians still argue whether the cumulative burden of these various taxes and tithes stifled economic initiative, or if they were seen as a necessary part of the social contract, providing for governance and spiritual well-being. Did people resent them openly, leading to revolts? Or were they simply an accepted, if burdensome, fact of life? For you, feeling the constant drain on your already meager resources, it's just another layer of difficulty in an already impossibly hard existence. Every penny earned feels like it has invisible hands pulling at it, reducing your chance of ever getting ahead, of ever truly accumulating enough to feel secure. The idea of disposable income is as fantastical as a dragon soaring over St. Paul's. You've seen how your hard-earned pence vanish into the coffers of kings and churches, leaving precious little for yourself. This constant financial squeeze, combined with the rigid social structures we've touched upon, leads us to a rather somber truth about medieval London. Social mobility is about as easy as climbing a greased pole during a thunderstorm. For you, the common laborer or apprentice, the notion of climbing the ladder in the modern sense is largely a fantasy. You are born into a particular social stratum, and for the vast majority, that's where you'll stay. If your father was a carter, chances are you'll be a carter or something similarly situated. This isn't a meritocracy where hard work alone guarantees upward movement. It's more like a societal caste system, albeit with some incredibly rare, almost mythical exceptions. The primary avenue for any kind of upward movement is through the guild system, but as we discussed, even that is fraught with difficulty. To become a master craftsman, you need not only skill and years of dedication, but also capital to set up your own workshop, and often the approval of existing masters who are hardly keen on new competition. Imagine trying to save up enough money to buy tools, and rent a space when you're barely making enough to feed yourself. It's a generational struggle at best. Marriage can sometimes offer a slight bump, perhaps marrying into a slightly more prosperous family. But even then, it's a step, not a leap. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval English society was largely hierarchical and static, with social status primarily determined by birth. While some limited mobility existed, particularly within urban centers like London, it was exceptional and rarely involved moving between distinct social classes, e.g., from peasantry to nobility. You were mostly stuck where you started. Now for a quirky tidbit. Sometimes, a truly lucky break might come in the form of a wealthy patron taking an interest in your talents, perhaps if you showed exceptional artistic skill or intellectual prowess. Such patronage was rare, akin to winning the medieval lottery, but it did happen. A particularly gifted scribe might find himself employed by a noble household, or a talented musician might gain favor at court. Imagine being discovered while sketching on a discarded piece of parchment by a passing, benevolent lord. By Jove, young man, your stick figures are truly revolutionary. You shall draw my pet goat, forthwith. It's a nice thought, but probably not going to happen to you. Historians still argue whether the perceived stability of a rigid social hierarchy truly prevented widespread discontent or simply channeled it into localized revolts and everyday resentment. Did people accept their lot in life with resignation, or was there a simmering frustration beneath the surface of apparent order? For you, watching the finely dressed merchants glide by in their silks and furs, you're keenly aware of the vast chasm between your existence and theirs. The ambition to rise, to accumulate wealth, feels less like a dream and more like a cruel joke. Your struggle isn't about getting rich, it's about not falling further down. And in this stratified society, falling is always, terrifyingly, an option. You felt the invisible chains of social standing, the almost insurmountable barriers to rising above your station in medieval London. But amidst the grime, the struggle, and the relentless toil, there is one pervasive force that touches every single aspect of your life, from dawn to dusk, from birth to death: the church. Whether you like it or not, your existence is utterly saturated with religious observance and belief. This isn't a world where religion is a private matter, reserved for an hour on Sunday. No, the church, specifically the Roman Catholic Church, is the dominant institution, more powerful in many ways than the king himself. Its cathedrals, like the magnificent old St. Paul's, dominate the skyline, their bells marking the hours of the day and calling the faithful to prayer. You hear the calls to matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nones, vespers, and complement a constant liturgical soundtrack to your life, even if you don't attend every service. Your day is punctuated by religious festivals, saints' days, and fasts. Every major life event, from baptism to marriage to burial, is conducted through the church. Sickness is often seen as divine punishment or a test of faith, and healing might involve prayers, pilgrimages, or relics, alongside the dubious remedies of the barber surgeon. The afterlife is a very real, very terrifying prospect, and the church holds the keys to salvation. You might pay for indulgences, make offerings, or join a religious fraternity, all in the hope of securing a better fate for your soul. It's less about personal spirituality and more about communal obligation and the fear of eternal damnation. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The church was the central pillar of medieval society, influencing law, education, charity, and daily life in profound ways. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was a major landowner, an employer, a social safety net, however limited, and the primary source of moral authority. Imagine a world where every single school, hospital, and welfare organization is run by one monolithic religious body. Now for a quirky tidbit. Beyond the grand ceremonies, people found their own unique ways to integrate faith into their lives. Many houses would have small altars or crucifixes, and street corners often featured shrines or statues of saints where you might offer a quick prayer or light a candle. There was even a rather charming medieval belief that the ringing of church bells could ward off evil spirits and bad weather. So, when a storm rolled in, you might hear every bell in London start clanging away, a cacophony of desperate hope. Ring louder, Bartholomew. My washing is still out. Historians still argue whether the pervasive influence of the church genuinely provided comfort and social cohesion in a harsh world, or if it primarily served as a tool for social control and the accumulation of wealth by the clergy. Was it a source of spiritual solace for the masses, or a system that exploited their fears and superstitions? For you, the common Londoner, it's simply a fact of life. You attend Mass when you can, you offer your tithe, grudgingly or otherwise, and you hope that your piety, combined with a lot of hard work, will be enough to get you through this life and into the next. The omnipresent gaze of God and his earthly representatives is something you can never truly escape. You felt the pervasive influence of the church, a constant presence in your medieval London life. But what if, for a moment, the sheer pressure of making a living, the squalor, the disease, the endless work becomes too much? What if you dream of escaping the city's suffocating grip, if only for a little while, or even forever? For most, the idea of simply packing up your meager belongings and leaving London is a romantic fantasy, far removed from the harsh reality. If you're tied to an apprenticeship, you literally cannot leave without your master's permission. If you owe debts, or if you've committed even a minor infraction, the city gates might as well be prison bars. And where would you go? The countryside is equally structured, with lords, manors, and a system of serfdom that might be even more restrictive than urban life, just with more fresh air and fewer rats. The idea of going west for opportunity is definitely not a medieval concept. However, there were occasional, fleeting opportunities for respite or even a desperate break from the cycle. Fairs, for instance, held outside the city walls on specific feast days, could offer a temporary escape from the daily grind. These weren't just markets. They were social events with entertainment, games, and perhaps even a traveling minstrel or juggler. Imagine the excitement of venturing out to a fair, seeing new faces, and momentarily forgetting the stench of the city. It's like a medieval vacation, albeit one where you still probably had to work to sell something. Here's a mainstream historical fact. While highly regulated, medieval London city gates and river crossings did allow for considerable movement of goods and people, though this movement was often monitored and taxed. Leaving permanently, especially without good reason or permission, could lead to a loss of status, a forfeiture of property, or even legal consequences if you were seen as abandoning obligations. It wasn't as simple as hopping on a train. Now for a quirky tidbit, sometimes people sought a different kind of escape, monastic life. For those deeply religious or simply desperate for an alternative to the harshness of secular existence, joining a monastery or convent offered a structured life, often with better food, shelter, and a community. It wasn't an easy path, requiring dedication and often a dowry, but it was a legitimate way to remove oneself from the demands of the real world. Imagine trading the clamor of Cheapside for the quiet solitude of a cloister, a life of prayer and contemplation. Of course, you'd still be working, just perhaps with less immediate threat of dysentery. Yes, Brother Thomas, I'd like to sign up for this silent contemplation with regular meals package, please. Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of physical mobility for the medieval commoner led to greater social cohesion within communities, or if it fostered a sense of entrapment and resentment that occasionally boiled over into unrest. Did the lack of easy escape mean you just made the best of where you were, or did it fuel a quiet desperation? For you, the option to truly leave London behind feels distant, almost impossible. You are bound by your circumstances, by your labor, and by the invisible threads of society. Your world is, for the most part, confined within these grimy, bustling walls. The desire to simply breathe air free of the city's smells, even for a moment, feels like an indulgence you can rarely afford. You've imagined the desperate yearning for escape, the fleeting thoughts of a life beyond the city walls. But now, as our journey through medieval London draws to a close, let's reflect on what it truly meant to make a living in this remarkable, yet utterly unforgiving, urban landscape. It's a testament to the incredible resilience of humanity, a quality you, our imagined Londoner, possess in spades, even if you're unaware of it. You've battled against the stench and disease, the constant threat of hunger, and the relentless grind of labor from dawn till dusk. You've navigated a society where your birth determined most of your prospects, where the guilds held the keys to opportunity, and where justice was often a brutal spectacle. You've contributed to a bustling economy, haggled in chaotic markets, and lived under the constant watchful eye of both king and church, all while trying to keep a roof over your head and food in your belly. Your life wasn't about accumulating wealth or achieving personal fulfillment in the modern sense. It was about sheer, day-to-day survival, and perhaps the faint hope that your children might have a slightly less arduous path than your own. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Despite the numerous challenges, medieval London continued to grow and thrive throughout the period, demonstrating the remarkable capacity of its inhabitants to adapt and persist. This wasn't a city in decline. It was a dynamic, albeit difficult, place that drew people in despite its hardships, offering opportunities, however limited, that rural life often couldn't provide. Now for a quirky tidbit. Even amidst the squalor, medieval Londoners found ways to enjoy themselves. There were public holidays, often tied to religious festivals, where work ceased and people gathered for feasting, games, and entertainment. You might have seen traveling players putting on mystery plays or witnessed a lively procession. There were also numerous taverns and alehouses practically on every street corner where you could drown your sorrows or celebrate a small victory. Imagine the communal singing, the shared laughter, the momentary relief from the incessant pressure of life. It's a reminder that even when life is brutally hard, human beings will always find a way to connect and seek joy. Another round of ale, bartender. And no, I haven't seen a rat this big since last Tuesday. Historians still argue whether the apparent harshness of medieval urban life led to a stronger sense of community and mutual aid among the working classes, or if it simply fostered greater competition and self-interest. Did people pull together more in the face of adversity, or did every person become an island, focused solely on their own survival? For you, as the hypothetical Londoner, it's a blur of both. You relied on your neighbors, your family, and your small circle, but you also had to be fiercely independent, shrewd, and tough. You endured, not just because you had to, but because there was no alternative. You are a survivor, a testament to the enduring human spirit that, even in the muck and mire of medieval London, found a way to wake up each day and face the relentless grind, one breath, one step, one hard-earned penny at a time. And with that, your extraordinary journey through the hardscrabble streets of medieval London comes to a quiet close. The sounds of London begin to fade now. The distant clamor of the market, the faint cries of street vendors, the gentle lapping of the Thames, they all soften, becoming mere whispers in the stillness. Your imagined clothes, once heavy with the grime and dampness of the city, now feel light, almost ethereal. The aches in your weary body begin to dissolve, and the worries about tomorrow's bread or the next bout of illness drift away like smoke on the wind. Let the images settle. Let the bustling energy of that distant past recede. You've done your time. You've understood the struggle. Now, there's only peace, a gentle quiet that wraps around you like a soft, comforting blanket. Feel yourself sinking deeper, letting go of the weight of history, of the cold, hard ground, of the incessant demands. Just breathe. Let your mind clear, empty itself of all the details, all the effort. The city sleeps now, and so, my friend, should you. Sweet dreams.